President Joe Biden has unveiled his more than $2 trillion infrastructure package. The American Jobs Plan is billed as a much-needed overhaul, but there's still opposition in exactly how it's funded. While U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg joins us now from Washington, D.C. to help break down the plan. And Secretary, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with us this morning. So how will this benefit U.S. agricultural trade to begin with?
Well, this is an investment in the foundation of the American economy. You think about, for example, agriculture exports, and we're seeing a lot of backups in our ports. Now, that's part of an entire infrastructure system that's got to get better, from the port to the rail that's getting things to the port, to the rural roads and bridges that are getting things to where they can get on the rails. All of those things need an upgrade. They have for a very long time. But you don't have to use your imagination to get all the way out to where our agricultural products are being shipped overseas to see where it would make a difference, because closer to home, in our own communities, frankly, especially in our rural communities, I think Americans are seeing every day why we need to do better with our roads, why we need to do more with our bridges. This plan includes funds to address 10,000 bridges across America, and I bet a lot of viewers are thinking of one right now that's close to where they live that needs that work before something terrible happens.
Going beyond the idea of trade and also the roadways, how else will this specifically benefit our rural communities?
Well, what you're seeing here is resources that are across the board going to make life better in America. I would point to transit and investing in transit in rural areas. You know, it's not just a big city thing, even though that's where a lot of people's minds go. We know that being able to get around smaller communities is very important too. We're talking about resources for broadband, and you know, especially in the pandemic era, but even before that. We've seen how important it is to be able to access the internet, especially, you know, you talk to a lot of farmers who are so reliant on the ability to get information, data, whether we're talking about weather information or whether we're talking about connecting to markets. So the president's commitment to get rural broadband out, to get broadband available to every single American, I think is one of the most exciting things in this plan, because it's visionary in the same way that railways would have seemed like a futuristic visionary idea back in the Lincoln administration when he was making a similar generational commitment to infrastructure.
Mr. Secretary, of course, as you mentioned, broadband much needed across the countryside, in rural and in urban settings as well. Congress has to sign off on this, but nonetheless, what kind of timeline are we talking about making things happen? Of course, these communities think they need it yesterday.
Well, that's right. I mean, it can't come soon enough. And so I know it's not always a specialty here in Washington to move quickly, but that's what the president has directed us to do. And that's what we're working with Congress to do. And I do think there's a shared sense of impatience from communities all the way up through to Capitol Hill. So we're really going into overdrive this spring, hoping to be able to deliver something quickly to the American people.
Now, of course, we have a lot of farmers and ranchers that are tuning in who agree there needs to be an infrastructure overhaul across many aspects. But where they might differ is the cost and exactly how to pay for it. What do you say to our nation's producers who might be worried and hesitant to get on board because of the potential tax increase?
Well, the good news is that this is fully paid for, and the president has insisted from the get-go that we do this in a way that does not increase taxes for anyone making less than $400,000 a year. Now, if you're making more than that, this could affect your bottom line, but you'll still be fine. What we know is that there are a lot of multinational corporations, by the way, some of the same ones that have been consolidating both on the supply side and the purchasing side and squeezing our farmers. These corporations sometimes pay nothing at all in taxes. So we got to rebalance our tax code, have a reasonable corporate tax rate, which, by the way, what the president's proposing is still lower than it's been for most of the time since World War II, but enough to actually do these things. Because if we keep slashing corporate taxes to where they pay nothing at all, you and I pay for it, farmers pay for it, every time you have a piece of equipment messed up by having to go on a road that's inadequate, or deal with a bridge that's failing, or face delays on getting your products out to market, because we haven't kept up on our railway infrastructure, our ports or airports.
And in talking about, of course, the transportation infrastructure, one thing we haven't mentioned is the locks and dams. Since I've been a broadcaster, we've been talking about the need to upgrade these locks and dam systems across the country. Again, it's just been talked about. What kind of timeline, and is it a priority within this plan?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. It's really important to pay attention to our waterways as well. They're so important, and it's not, as you know, it's not just a coastal issue. This is really important in inland communities. And we've got a ton of work to do there. So a lot of that is in partnership with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and that's certainly part of the President's vision here.
And what about manufacturing? Can you bring us up to speed on the investments to better secure those U.S. supply chains?
Yeah, there's a lot in this bill about building up U.S. manufacturing base because, frankly, we're hurting for some supply chain issues, from a semiconductor shortage to not having enough battery capacity. We want the U.S. to be leading the world on electric vehicles, and that's not just going to happen on its own. So this is investments in workers, in apprenticeships, in the kind of preparation and skills training to make sure that we're ahead. We ought to be in the #1 position on any kind of manufacturing. And, of course, that goes hand in hand with having a healthy agricultural economy, too.
And, Secretary, net zero initiatives have been mentioned throughout the discussions leading up to this plan being released. When we talk about net zero initiatives, put that into perspective for us, if you would.
Yeah, of course, nobody is going to feel the impact of extreme weather events accelerating due to climate issues. Nobody's feeling that more than America's farmers, and that's just one more reason why we've got to act and move our economy to net zero by 2050. Now, we already know a lot of the things that need to happen in order to get there. It's things like converting more and more of our vehicles, cars, and then eventually heavier duty vehicles too, to electric. It's better planning in terms of transportation options so that people have the option of good transit when it makes sense for them. And it's making sure that we have a stronger electric grid. We saw what happened in Texas. I'm afraid the future is going to be full of devastating stories like that if we don't act. And I got to say, one thing that really excites me is how farming is becoming more and more carbon responsible. There's even carbon negative farming, taking carbon out of the air through good soil management. I think that could be a point of pride for America just as much as the Green Revolution was a couple of generations ago. And I can't wait to see American agriculture and the American people deliver on those solutions out of our heartland that are going to lead the world.
Mr. Secretary, when we're talking about the net zero, also, of course, you mentioned the electric vehicles. Biofuels are significant across the agriculture industry, being employed, being used, and reducing emissions. Also, from the perspective of farmers, rural America, they travel a long distance, and electric vehicles are not always going to be the answer. Are they going to be penalized for their needs for having to have a four-wheel drive truck to get their work done?
Well, we recognize that in rural America, especially for our farmers, you got to cover long distances. Remember the savings that could be available to people when we do have these, certainly for things like pickup trucks, for example. When they go electric, the fuel savings that you get over the long run are really compelling. So this is designed to be a win-win, and it's got to be set up in a way that makes things easier, not harder, for people who are literally feeding America.
Mr. Secretary, we appreciate you taking the time to visit with us this morning. Thank you very much. U.S. Secretary of Transportation Pete Buttigieg joining us, of course, today from Washington, D.C. Again, thank you, Secretary, for your time.